is 6:03 p.m. And as we begin all of our presentations here at the Silversides, if you are able, please rise when we say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. It is so exciting to see more and more people in person. And I am hoping maybe by the end of this 10-week session that we will have enough people that will want to move back upstairs.
Oh, yeah.
And that would be great. Because each and every week we have been fluctuating between people here, but still more people online. And I'm just hoping that we can continue in this trend and get back to pre-COVID numbers for everything that we're doing. And that to me is totally exciting. Well, welcome everyone to the third of our 10-week series on World War II in the Pacific. Tonight's lecture talks about the presidents that served in World War II. And those of you who were here 2 weeks ago when it was President's Day may have been primed a little bit to give our speaker a good run for the money on those ones. And so we're so excited to have that happening tonight. Our sponsor, okay, click, click. Oh, it did, it worked. Yay, I'm going back. Oh, okay, keep going back. One more sponsorship back. Thank you. Our series sponsor is the Lorraine and Fred Birch Foundation out of Holland, Michigan. They are a wonderful couple that met during World War II and both dedicated their lives to service after the war. They met while serving in World War II. And then when they came back, they moved to Holland, and they both went and became public educators. He was a high school principal in Holland. And they felt that the greatest gift that you could have to your community is service. And service not only at the state and the federal level, but the local level as well. And education was such a strong point of that. And they are one of our dedicated sponsors for this series. Our other sponsor, our media sponsor, is Blue Lake Public Radio. They are wonderful to us, and each and every week they talk about us and let the world know all the wonderful things that are happening at the museum. For those of you that are regulars here at the museum, you know that our mission is simple. Is to honor the veteran, and to honor the veteran through education and preservation. Everyone sees what we do for our preservation, whether it be our two primary artifacts of the USS Silversides or the Coast Guard Cutter McLean, but all the internal artifacts. And these artifacts are there to spark conversation and to make them living, learning laboratories for a generation that doesn't know much about the subject anymore. And one of the greatest challenges that we face here at the museum, in order to serve our mission of honoring the veteran, it's very difficult not to know something and to honor someone. And so through these educational programs, through our artifacts, a person gets to understand what it was like to be a veteran and who the veterans are, and that is how we honor them. Because it's very difficult to honor something that you know nothing about. We also do not receive any state, federal, or local funding. All of this is done through admissions, gift shop sales, and the generous support of our community around us, for which we thank you very much. Our spring lecture series, it's been amazing so far. So many times we talk about World War II in Europe, and we don't talk as much about what happened in the Pacific. Now we could have an entire debate about why that is. We could have an entire debate about why it was chosen that we would complete the campaign in Europe before we worked on the Pacific. We could have many, many discussions, but this series highlights so many of the topics that are there. For those of you that are there our first night, you know we set the stage and understood how we got to be part of that. Last week we spent some time talking about the USS Flyer, a submarine that went down off the coast of the Philippines in August of '44, and the extraordinary lengths that those men went to be able to come back to America and continue fighting the war. And so it is our pleasure to continue this series. Any of you that are interested, there are posters available. I encourage each and every one of you to take them and spread them around town, because one of the biggest challenges that we have is how to get people to know that we're here and doing these wonderful things until they know we exist. So if you have any place that you like to frequent, please pick up a poster, bring it back with you, put it around town. And encourage your friends, even if they're not feeling comfortable coming out to be in public just yet, tell them there's Zoom links available, and we're more than happy to have. And all of these lectures then, once they have had a chance to be edited, are put up on our YouTube channel, on our website, and they are open to the public. And we see more people watching them after the fact. We have one lecture from about 7 years ago. It was David Stayhill, and he was talking about Operation Barbarossa. He has 26,000 views. Wow. Now, for a historian, that's a rock star. And that's amazing. And so each and every one of our lectures are out there, and they're continuously being viewed. So we feel we're trying to serve our mission as much as absolutely possible. Next week, we'll be talking about the beginning, when America first had the opportunity to strike back at the enemy. Because between December 7th and April of 1942, not much was able to be accomplished by the United States. They were severely limited because of the damage that was done at Pearl Harbor. They had a lot of rebuilding to do, regrouping to do, and we were losing island after island after island. The first strike back was Mr. Doolittle and his amazing change on the Hornet to be able to do that. And the Hornet has an incredible history of her own, even beyond this one. So that is next week's topic. So I hope that all of you are here, or if you're not able to be here, you watch us on Zoom, and you encourage your friends to either come with you or to watch it on Zoom, because all of this is such important information, and it really adds so much information and background, makes you understand the entire conflict so much better. We are very lucky that tonight's presenter and next week's presenter is here in the back of the room, Fred Johnson. And tonight's presentation is on the presidents that served in World War II in the Pacific. And you all know, if you were here on that first night, we had two gentlemen we threw right off the bat. And who were they that did not get to be included in this lecture? Who were the two presidents that we could not include in this lecture?
Eisenhower.
You got it, Eisenhower. We didn't like him because he stayed in Europe. Okay, who's my other president that did not serve in the Pacific?
Carter.
Well, we were having that discussion about Carter. We have, I say no because he was in school. Someone else says yes because he's there in post-war, Okay, so.
Reagan.
Got it, Reagan. Why didn't Reagan serve out of the United States?
Eyesight.
So, without further ado, I turn you all over to our wonderful speaker. And if anyone cannot hear well, please let us know and we'll grab the microphone. But usually I have a pretty loud and booming voice, and in this small area I don't really need. But if you have any questions, we'll answer them at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. It's good to be with you all again. Peg has given me a new goal. 26,000 views, huh, Peg?
You got it. 26,000 views.
I have to see if I can up that. Yeah, just as Peg pointed out, we're talking about the presidents who served in the Pacific Theater during World War II.
And I'm going to end my show.
Okay.
And put up yours.
This is a fascinating subject, absolutely fascinating. And have you all realized just in the last week with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, how the more things change, the more they stay the same? It feels like we're living World War II in an updated form right now. And you talk about the Americans talking about with the Polish government about sending jets to Poland so that the Poles can then give it to the Ukrainians. That's a modern form of lend-lease. Okay, and Peg is right. If you don't know about the earlier version of that, all this is happening for the first time. Fortunately, we have people like you all who are interested in history. We're not being caught by surprise by this stuff. What we're looking at is those future presidents who served the Pacific Theater of World War II. This guy was not a president, but I wanted to start with him because he exemplifies the heroism, the resourcefulness, and the sheer grit and ingenuity of naval officers during World War II. His nickname was the Sea Wolf. He was a PT boat commander. The same kind of vessel that was commanded by our first president that I want to take a look at. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor. He retired as a vice admiral. His name was John Bulkeley. John D. Bulkeley earned lasting fame for himself and the gratitude of a certain general named MacArthur. When in 1942, Lieutenant Bulkeley, who was leading a PT, who was commanding a PT boat, was ordered to remove or ferry General MacArthur from the island of Corregidor to another island where MacArthur caught a B-17 and then escaped to Australia upon the order of General MacArthur. That PT boat that Commander Bulkeley had to get, was commanding, they had to go across open water that in early 1942, Peck was talking about the Doolittle Raid of April 1942, when MacArthur evacuated Corregidor, where he had been holed up. Some of you have read enough about him to know that the troops were calling him Dugout Doug. Well, Dugout Doug was ferried by this guy, him and his family, his wife, his son, and MacArthur's staff on these PT boats across open waters that were Japanese infested. It was extremely dangerous. And for that, Commander Bulkeley won for himself the Medal of Honor and eventually was brought home. This is troops coming out of the Malanta Tunnel. After MacArthur evacuated, these Japanese troops found these American troops and their Filipino allies in the Malanta Tunnel where they had been held up. And they, of course, spent the rest of the war in a POW camp. So MacArthur was ordered off of Corregidor on March 11, 1942. And for his part, Commander Bulkeley wrote a book. There was a book written about him. If you're interested in such a thing and taking notes, the book was They Were Expendable, an American Torpedo Boat Squadron in the U.S. Retreat from the Philippines by WWII, which demonstrates the heroism and the valor of these patrol torpedo boats and their crews. And Commander Bulkeley was eventually brought home to go across the country raising money on a war bond tour, which of course is one way that America was using to finance the war during World War II. We go from there to looking at the 6 presidents who served in World War II. Well, 5 if you don't count Carter. John F. Kennedy, and I looked at them in the order of when they were president, starting off with John F. Kennedy, followed by his vice president, then his president, Lyndon Johnson, and then Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and then Jimmy Carter, again, in but not in, and then finishing up with George Herbert Walker Bush, who truly was an amazing individual. They all were amazing, but George Herbert Walker Bush just stands out for me among all of them for so many different reasons. We take a look at these guys, starting with John F. Kennedy, who was the 35th president of the United States, serving from 1961 to 1963. Now, we all know what happened to John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. He was assassinated while in Dallas, Texas. But he had an amazing career as a naval officer and earned for himself some lasting fame also for his own heroism. Now, I decided to put at the beginning of each of their, talking about each of them, to put a picture of the young Kennedy and the older Kennedy when they became president. In October 1941, John F. Kennedy was appointed an ensign in the U.S. Naval Reserve, and he was initially assigned to staff for the Office of Naval Intelligence before attending the Naval Reserve NROTC from July 27th to September 1942. So Pearl Harbor's already happened when he goes into the Navy. But that's in October 1941. So the Pearl Harbor has not happened, but soon after that, he's going to this NROTC training. The thing that just kept stunning me was how young these guys were and then what they did. He entered the MTB, or Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron Training Center in Rhode Island. Now, the other thing I found out was that there were two companies in the United States that made the PT boats. One was called the Elko boat, and the other one I can't remember right now, but there were two different companies that made the PT boats, and he was the one, he commanded one that's called the Elko boat. Upon graduation, he was assigned to MTB Squadron 4 as the CEO of PT 101, and then April 23rd, 1943, he took command of the PT 109, which is the one that he was commanding when he had his accident, his run with a Japanese destroyer that eventually made him famous, and also contributed to some back problems he would have for the rest of his life. It was August 1st, 1943, 9 operations. Kennedy was at the helm, and PT 109 was run over by a Japanese destroyer named the Amagiri, which cut the torpedo boat in two. Kennedy was thrown from the cockpit of the boat and landed on his back that had been injured prior to joining the Navy. Now, it's important to note that in 1943, the Japanese Navy is operating in the Solomon Islands. Recall that in August 7th, 1942, the Americans made their first amphibious landing at a place called Guadalcanal. It was the first amphibious landing for the American forces to literally try and take back ground that the Japanese had taken in their initial 6 months to the first year of the war. So this was offensive operations. It wasn't the first time the Americans responded to the Japanese. Again, there was the Doolittle raid and the Battle of the Philippines that didn't go too well. But Guadalcanal was the first major operation where Americans met Japanese forces and got an idea of what they would be doing for the rest of the conflict and trying to take back island after island after island. The thing about this was that the Japanese Navy during that period, in the campaign of the Solomon Islands, the Japanese Navy at that point was the best Navy in the world when it came to night operations. They were just good at it. They had practiced it, they had been at war with China since 1931, so they were very experienced in night operations. So the fact that this happened at nighttime was both a testament to the confusion of warfare and the fact that the Japanese Navy was just good at nighttime operations. The other thing about it, though, was as the Americans got better and better and better at beating the Japanese, so many ships were sunk between the Japanese and the Americans that someplace in the Solomon campaign, there was a stretch of the ocean that they called Iron Bottom Sound because of the number of ships that were sank between the two of them. After the ship was cut in two, some survivors were clinging to pieces of the ship, and Kennedy swam to the remaining crew members to bring them back to the floating remnant of PT 109. 2 crew members had died during the collision. Kennedy then told one injured crewman as he and others swam 5 hours to cover the distance of 3 miles to an island. That must have been exhausting in an extreme kind of way. While there, he got to the island, and the island that he swam to was an island called Nauru, right here. And look at this. This is in the Mariana chain, Kiribati, Tuvalu, Fiji, the Solomon Islands right here, Papua New Guinea. So all these different areas will be where Americans are operating in different island campaigns during the course of the Pacific War. But right here is where he swam to. Mr. Kennedy and the executive officer found his island inhabitants, and then he wrote a message on a coconut. 11 alive, native knows, position and reef Nauru Island Kennedy. That was the message. On a coconut. On a coconut. August 8, 1943. Kennedy was then rescued by the crew members from PT 157. Then he went to Tulagai, became skipper of the PT 59. In October 1943, he was promoted to lieutenant, and with the squadron that was moved to Vella La Vella. On November 18, 1943, John F. Kennedy had continued problems with his back, and it moved the Navy doctor to order him out of action. In early January 1943, he returned to the U.S., spent much of the rest of his Navy career getting treatment for his back problems. And you all who have studied John F. Kennedy know that he had back problems for the rest of his life. It dogged him through his presidency. In March 1945, he was released from all active duty and retired to the U.S. Naval Reserve on physical disability. John F. Kennedy, future President of the United States, Pacific War veteran. LBJ, the 6'4" Texan. There's a picture of LBJ as a young man. and the more familiar LBJ. Don't you just wonder if the young LBJ wanted to punch his barber? Lyndon Johnson, the 37th president of the United States, by June 21st, 1940, he had been appointed a lieutenant commander of the United States Naval Reserve. By then, he'd already earned a bachelor's degree, worked as a school teacher, and had been twice elected to Congress at the age of 32. It is important to note that LBJ was a serious fan and protege of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. By 1940, so he's been elected to Congress 2 times by 1940. This means that he's been active in politics during the Great Depression. I'll mention this probably later on again, but let me just say this right now. There's a professor named William Lichtenberg who wrote a book entitled In FDR's Shadow. And he has said that ever since the presidency of FDR, every president since then, I mean every president from Truman to Kennedy to Eisenhower to Nixon to Carter to Clinton, everyone up to the current president we have, because the book has been updated, every president's administration has been judged by the first 100 days of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration. FDR set a standard about the first 100 days of legislation, and he got so much done that every other presidency is said to be either succeeding or failing, depending upon how they keep pace with the amount of work that FDR did in his administration. And LBJ, being a fan and worshiper of FDR and a protege of his, sought to do the same thing during his own administration. But for the moment, during World War II, to have already had a bachelor's degree and a school teacher, for a poor kid coming from the rural parts of Texas, that was not bad at all. December 9, 1941, 2 days after Pearl Harbor, he reports for active duty and was assigned to the office of the Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, D.C. Reserves. After his training, he proceeded to headquarters, 12th Naval District, San Francisco, California, for inspection duty in the Pacific. And while stationed in New Zealand and Australia, he worked as an observer of bomber missions in the South Pacific, which he was later awarded an Army Silver Star Medal. So what I found out doing this research is that these guys very often, they were on loan to the Army sometimes, or they worked very closely with the Army. That whole thing that you all know about, of course, understanding military history, is sometimes there's a thing called inter-service rivalry. In the early part of 1942, not a whole lot of that going on because the services really had to cooperate with each other or face annihilation. President Roosevelt sent out an order for all members of Congress who were in the armed forces to return to their legislative duties. So on June 16, 1942, LBJ was honorably released from active duty and went back to his work in Congress. And there he stayed until throughout World War II. In 1949, he was promoted to commander in the Naval Reserve. Now, there's something about all these guys. They served in World War II, so of course they're veterans. That's going to help mark them and shape them for their presidency. But there's some other things that will shape their presidencies, as we'll see later on. I just thought I would put this in. You can see almost the adoration just beaming off of LBJ's face as he gets real close to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Roosevelt seems rather happy to see him too. Richard Nixon, the 37th president. I kept wondering, in putting this together, how did these individuals end up becoming who they were? How did the war impact them emotionally? How did it impact them intellectually? What during the war, shaped the decisions they eventually made? Here you see a young Nixon and an old Nixon. The one thing about both of these pictures of Nixon, he's got that very prominent jawline. Okay? June 15, 1942. He joins the Navy at age 29 as a Lieutenant JG, U.S. Naval Reserve. Nixon's already a lawyer. He'd been working as an attorney for the Office of Emergency Management in Washington, D.C. Following his appointment, he began naval aviation and indoctrination training at the Naval Training School, Naval Air Station, Quonset Point, Rhode Island. October 42, he completed the course and then went to Naval Reserve Aviation Base in Ottumwa, Iowa. Now, scholars of the Silver Side Museum, I don't know about you, but when I saw this, I said, they sent this guy to naval aviation training in Iowa? That's why they call it military intelligence. He served as an aide to the executive officer there until May 1943. You all are well read enough and well informed enough that to know that by May 1943, something had happened the previous year from June 4th through 6th called Midway, which meant that the five or six attack carriers that struck the American base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and Midway, almost to the month. There's a story that before the attack on Pearl Harbor was initiated, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was asked by his superiors, how long can you buy us when we take out the American fleet? He estimated, I can give you 6 months. After that, I can't promise you anything. Count it. December, January, February, March, April, May, June, 1942, 6 months to the month. The attack squadron that hit Pearl Harbor, 90% of those ships were sunk. And the Japanese on that day, the Battle of Midway, June 4 through 6, 1942, they went from waging an offensive war to a defensive war, which means that from 1942 to 1945, when the war ended, they were going to be in a constant mode of backing up and worse yet, reacting to American initiative. Now, it doesn't mean that they still weren't formidable. They were formidable. It just means that now they don't get to choose the time, place, and method of attack. They got to respond to American initiative. So by 1943, that's how things had begun to shift. Nixon volunteered for sea duty and was sent to report to the Commander, Air Force, U.S. Pacific Fleet, and where he was assigned as an officer in charge of the South Pacific Combat Air Transport Command at Guadalcanal and the Solomons, and later at Green Island. You know that one of the big objectives for the Guadalcanal campaign was to capture Henderson Field and then upgrade it so that the Americans could have a land-based airfield with which to support their naval operations in the Solomon Islands. Nixon's unit, he was working with this aircraft right here called the C-47 Skytrain. They call these things Goonie birds. But these aircraft were produced by Douglas Aircraft. They were slow. Well, they weren't that slow for the kind of aircraft they were. They were extremely reliable. They used these in the China-Burma India Theater, flying over the hump, the Himalayas. These are the C-46 Commandos. His unit prepared manifests and fight plans for the C-47 operation. Nixon was also in charge of supervising the loading and unloading of cargo aircraft. And I'll tell you what, I don't know, had it not been for the pandemic, we all have come to appreciate, maybe with a newfound love and appreciation, for something called the supply chain, right? So we know that loading and unloading aircraft is a big deal. I'm not so sure, had it not been for the pandemic, that I would have thought that way. I've been looking for a certain type of cracker at Meyer for the last 2 years. I haven't found it. Nixon earned a letter of commendation from the commander, South Pacific Area, South Pacific Air Force, for, quote, meritorious and efficient performance of duty as officer in charge of the South Pacific Combat Air Transport Command. Air Transport Command, the Military Air Transport Command, is what the forerunner of the Air Force's MAC, Military Airlift Command, which I think is what the Air Force has today. October 1, 1943, Nixon was promoted to lieutenant. And from August to December 1944, he was assigned to Fleet Air Wing 8 at Naval Station Alameda, California. So he's back in America, and then transferred to the Bureau of Aeronautics in Washington, D.C. through March 1945. The war is just a few months away from ending. American forces are winning in the Pacific. Mr. Nixon was promoted to lieutenant commander. His next assignment was as a contracting officer in the Bureau of Aeronautics General Representative, Eastern District in New York City. And on March 10, 1946, the war is over. He's released from active duty on March 10th and is promoted to commander of the United States Naval Reserve in 1953. It was surprising to me, maybe it shouldn't have been, that these guys were still held on to their reserve status well after World War II. Another picture of Richard M. Nixon. Now, I'll confess something to you. I had no idea that Gerald Ford was such a jock. He truly was the man was a jock. Basketball, football, really football, especially football. He loved football. There's the young Ford right there. And can't you just look at this face? That's right. Someday I'm going to be president. Before, like I said, was big in sports. In fact, a lot of his assignments, in addition to what he was doing in his official capacity, what he did, what we might call it in college, in an extracurricular sense, he was also a coach in many instances, to include basketball, boxing, and of course football. Can we go back one? That picture right there, when I first looked at that, I said, that's Gerald Ford's expression. That's a man whose pants are too tight. And this was very encouraging to me, that this is from before World War II. You see that in this picture, you got some cultural things going on here. We have Ford, an African American football player, going on. This is, it just goes to show that things were moving in the right direction in America. And this is Ford right here, playing basketball on board an aircraft carrier. Before World War II, he was preparing to open his law practice in Grand Rapids with a fellow Yale Law School classmate, and then it happened. Pearl Harbor happened. After that, he joined the Navy. Instead of waiting to be drafted, he joined the Navy, and on April 13, 1942, at age 29, he was commissioned as an ensign, assigned to attend V5, that is Aviation Cadet Instructor School training at Annapolis. And he was assigned subsequently to Navy Pre-Flight School in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. There he taught elementary seamanship, ordnance, gunnery, first aid, and military drill. Now look, for those of you that have been in the military, you know military veterans. It's one thing to have an MOS where you do the one thing, but he's teaching elementary seamanship, ordnance, meaning munitions, gunnery, first aid, and military drill, which means he's a good drill instructor. There's a picture of him, I don't know if I have it in here, but there's a picture of him using a sextant. You know, the kind of thing that Christopher Columbus and those people use. A sextant. So, Gerald Ford is a lawyer who's good at gunnery, who's good at ordnance, who's good at seamanship, who's good at first aid, who's good at military drill. He's smart enough to use a sextant, an ancient piece of equipment used for navigation. So you have a man who's got a law degree from Yale, who's clearly smart, he's brilliant, has leadership qualities. It's no wonder he was a coach at basketball and football and boxing. You've got basically a Renaissance man in Gerald Ford inside the U.S. Navy. He's promoted to lieutenant and was assigned to the USS Monterey in a straight-deck aircraft carrier. Now look, in World War II, aircraft carriers were like these. These are called straight-deck aircraft carriers. So usually, when the captain said we're going to launch aircraft, they say launch aircraft. Aircraft carrier, the order would come, turn it to the wind. This is World War II. You got propeller aircraft. The propellers spin around to pull the aircraft into the wind fast enough to build up a pocket of air to lift the aircraft so it can do a thing called fly. Well, when you turn it to the wind, it causes the wind to come across the air, and then you say turn it to the wind, and then go faster. It makes the wind coming across the deck go faster. Then the propeller pulling the aircraft, so wind coming this way, aircraft being pulled that way, it gives it enough lift to take off. But you hear Jimmy Doolittle using B-25s, which are not supposed to be landing and taking off with aircraft carriers. You want as much lift as you can get in 1942. So very often, that's why during World War II, you could either be launching aircraft or recovering them, but you couldn't do both. It's why in the jet age, if you look at an aircraft carrier today, they have both straight deck, they have angle deck carriers, so you can have round-the-clock operations for launch and recovery at the same time. He served as the assistant navigator, athletic officer, and the anti-aircraft battery officer. You know what? I'm gonna tell you. Researching Gerald Ford, it's very hard to not feel inadequate. He could do so much. The USS Monterey saw action at Macon Island, and also at the following island chains, the Gilbert Islands. He saw The aircraft carrier participated at Kiving in New Ireland. The Monterey supported the landings at Kwajalein and Eniwetok. This is in the Aleutian Island chain. The Aleutians. They participated in carrier strikes in the Marianas, in the push toward getting toward Saipan and Tinian. Those two island chains were there. Saipan and Tinian, the Marianas campaign was, among other things, to get Americans close enough to build forward air bases so that B-29s can get close enough to do bombing raids, incendiary raids against the Japanese homeland. Honshu, the main island of Honshu, and so on. The Western Carolina Islands, as well as the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944. This aircraft carrier saw a lot of action. And so the crew on it, as did President Ford, or should I say Gerald Ford. That's him, I do have a picture, that's him using the sextant.
Oh.
December 17th, 1944, 17th to the 18th, Admiral William F. Bull Halsey, commanding Task Force 38, the ships got slammed by a typhoon named Cobra. The Monterey was damaged, and in that typhoon, those rough seas, Ford was almost thrown overboard, lost at sea. The Monterey underwent repairs in Bremerton, Washington, and while it was going through that, Ford was sent to the athletic department of the Navy Pre-Flight School at St. Mary's College. He was assigned to the athletic department until 1945. And then he was assigned to the staff, the Naval Reserve Training Command at Glenview, Illinois, as a physical and military training officer. Didn't I say he was a jock? He was promoted to lieutenant commander, and then on February 23rd, 1946, he was released from active duty. Now I know.
We had a long discussion about this.
We did. And Peg said it would be okay to share this with you, but Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, he was too young to actually participate in World War II, but in 1946, he graduated from the Naval Academy and then did 2 years of surface ship duty. So during World War II, at least. So he goes to the Naval Academy. Naval Academy is a 4-year school. Goes in there for 1942, does his 4 years, graduates, applies for submarine duty. Then he's in the Navy at a very, very significant time. You're transitioning from a World War II Navy to a obviously post-World War II Navy, but more than that, a Navy that now has to be part of a force structure that's fighting the Cold War. You know that the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union pretty much collapsed overnight after the surrender in May 1945, when the Russians get the surrender from the Germans in Berlin, the Americans, Canadians, and British get the surrender from the Germans in Reims, France. It's pretty much done. He applies for submarine duty, served as an executive officer, engineering officer, and electronics repair officer. Yeah, it was kind of hard feeling adequate with him too. Carter was promoted to lieutenant, and then from November 3rd, 1952 to March 1, 1953, he was temporary duty with the Naval Reactors Branch. Now this introduces something else. Keep in mind, August 6, 1945, America drops an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Then 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, having heard nothing sufficient from the Japanese government, they drop a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. We have entered the nuclear age. As one of my students said, I like the way they put it. America now has world-ending weapons. So with nuclear power, and with the relationship between the Soviet Union and the US breaking down, American nuclear and atomic planners began immediately looking at the possibilities for developing a hydrogen weapon, which makes the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like firecrackers by comparison. Hydrogen weapons are just powerful. So powerful they really should never ever be used. Never. But with that, the Navy's changing. And so he's assigned to the Naval Reactors Branch, U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, Washington, D.C. And we should take note of this right here. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission was a creation as a result of a bunch of atomic scientists who had worked on the Manhattan Project, who once they saw the result of the bomb that was tested at Alamogordo, New Mexico in July 1945, we were talking about J. Robert Oppenheimer before the start of the presentation. Oppenheimer, who was the father of the atomic bomb, who ran the whole operation in conjunction with General Leslie Groves. Once Oppenheimer saw the blast, the bright light, and the mushroom cloud and the winds, he became the world's first anti-nuclear activist. He quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "For I have become death, the destroyer of worlds." He had serious misgivings about the development of the hydrogen bomb. Part of what happened with Oppenheimer and other people was that the U.S. established the Atomic Energy Commission. Carter was there to assist in the design and development of nuclear propulsion plants for naval vessels. The person who was determined to take the U.S. Navy and turn it into what today is a nuclear reactor, the nuclear Navy, to go from diesel submarines, diesel-powered ships, and turn it into the nuclear Navy, was Admiral Hyman Rickover. Hyman G. Rickover, who was then a captain, started this program to create nuclear-powered submarines, and Carter wanted to join that program. He wanted to go aboard a nuclear submarine. So he was interviewed by Rickover, Hyman Rickover. I understand that Hyman Rickover was no joke. He had an attitude, he had temper, and it was like his way or the highway. This guy was a significant influence. He practically remade the Navy. So what happened was that Carter was assigned to a vessel called the USS Seawolf. From March 1st to October 8, 1953, he was preparing to become an engineering officer for the USS Seawolf, one of the first submarines to operate on atomic power. Now, again, the Navy is going through some major changes during these days. In my previous life, working at Goodyear Aerospace, I found out when I started working there, was one of the first, was a company that developed something called the sub-rock, a submarine rocket that has the technology to be launched from beneath the ocean and then achieve altitude coming from the waves. It's very, very difficult because, first of all, they're launching a rocket from beneath the waves. So it's got to break the surface and then go to target. So the trajectory, targeting, radar, all these onboard systems that the company, so these nuclear submarines had the capability and were being assigned that mission. That right there, the gentleman standing behind the guy at the periscope, is James Carter, Jimmy Carter. July 1953, Carter's father died, so he resigned from the Navy and returned to Georgia to manage his family's interest, that is the peanut farm. In October 1953, he was honorably discharged and transferred to the retired reserve at his request with the rank of lieutenant. When I read about that, I said, that's how nice of the Navy. In the Marine Corps, I requested a lot of stuff. I never got it. Then George Herbert Walker Bush. Again, we're looking at these guys in the order in which they served in the presidency. Herbert Walker Bush, of course, was elected after Reagan. Reagan succeeded Carter. All of these people are truly remarkable individuals. George Herbert Walker Bush, no less. Look at how young he is. In World War II, they were so young. They were so young. If you all have not, this just crossed my mind. If you have not seen it, there is a documentary made by Peter Jackson. It's pertaining to World War I. The title is "They Shall Not Grow Old." They shall not grow old. It is Peter Jackson took actual footage and film from World War I, and through digital remastering and computerization, he was able to create a documentary of people who fought in World War I. And of course, they were silent films. So what he did was he hired some lip readers to look at what people were saying, and then he recorded the lip readers and then overlaid the dubbed speeches of what people were saying. So what they're saying is in the film. Then he colorized it. He used the files from the British War Museum. If you haven't seen it, please get it. It is worth watching. The reason I mention this is because in that documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old, they talk about how some of the people that went to World War I were as young as 15 years old. 15, 16, 17 years old, going off to fight a war. But I'll forgive them because it was the first time humanity had ever done something like that, fought a war of that nature. It was an industrialized killing. And as I said before, it would have been bad enough if they had used just one brand new weapon system, but in World War I they introduced the machine gun, the airplane, the tank, the submarine, and gas. Now take human beings doing what we do when it comes to warfare anyway, add 5 brand new weapon systems, I'll leave it to your imagination to figure out what the result would be. Likewise, they were so young during World War I. Herbert Walker Bush is very young when he joins the Navy. Oddly enough, not as young as some of the veterans from World War I. He wanted to join the Navy right after Pearl Harbor, but he had to wait 6 months to graduate high school. On June 12, 1942, he enlisted on his 18th birthday. I must confess, when I saw this, what was that? This on his 18th birthday. Brown, green, weight 165. I said, boy for the days. After he enlists, April 1943, he graduated pre-flight training at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And it turns out another thing that happens during World War II, just like the Tuskegee Institute, which is an educational facility, a lot of universities around the country started training pilots. So apparently, the University of North Carolina did too. At only 19 years old, George Herbert Walker Bush was the youngest naval aviator in the Navy at the time. September 1943, he was assigned to Torpedo Squadron VT-51 as a photographic officer on board the aircraft carrier USS San Jacinto. And from May to June 1944, that unit operated in campaigns including the Marianas campaigns. I think that would have been during that, no, I think it was later during the year, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. And the Japanese were just throwing up pilots who had little to no training, but clearly the advantages swung to the Americans. Bush's aircraft made a forced water landing in June 19, 1944. The crew was rescued, but one crew member, but the plane was lost. Then, July 25th, 1944, hit another pilot who were credited with sinking a small cargo ship. And then in August 1944, he was promoted to lieutenant junior grade. I'll tell you the truth, I was in the Navy, whether the Marine Corps, which is owned by the Department of, or which the Department of the Navy has ownership of the Marine Corps. But I don't understand this Navy promotion, lieutenant junior grade, and all that. I'll have to figure that out one day. September 1944. In operations against the Japanese at Chichijima, Bush's plane was hit by intense anti-aircraft fire. He completed the mission, released the bombs over his target, scoring several damaging hits. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush was flying. There was something in World War II. The Navy had a bomber called the SBD Dauntless. They also had a version of the TBF Avenger. The TBF Avenger had 2 different versions. One that carried a bomb, but the more common one carried a torpedo. So it was a torpedo bomber. He's flying one that was a dive bomber, or at least a bomber. The engine was on fire. Bush and his crewmen bailed out of the aircraft. The crewman's chute failed to open, so he died upon impact. So Bush is there floating in the ocean, waiting to be rescued. This is George Herbert Walker Bush right here. For 4 hours, he was waiting to get rescued while several fighters circled overhead. He was rescued by the submarine called the USS Finback. He spent 1 month on the Finback as a lookout occasionally, and then also helping to rescue other downed pilots. November 1944, George Herbert Walker Bush returned to the USS San Jacinto and participated in operations in the Philippines. You're talking about the Philippines, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, things like this. This is that whole Philippine campaign when MacArthur goes striding ashore. You all have seen the very famous picture when MacArthur goes ashore and then grabs that microphone and says, "People of the Philippines, I have returned." This is Bush. Don't you just want to go back in time and tell that photographer, thank you for getting the picture of the future president. George Herbert Walker Bush is credited with having flown 58 combat missions. He earned the DFC, the Distinguished Flying Cross, which for pilots, I understand that is the highest award you can get. The only award higher than that is Congressional Medal of Honor. So for a pilot, getting the DFC means you're a good pilot. Or as they say in the Navy, you're a good naval aviator. 3 air medals and the Presidential Unit Citation, which was awarded to the San Jacinto. He was reassigned to Norfolk and put in a training wing for torpedo pilots. And then later assigned as a naval aviator and a new torpedo squadron. I told you they called them naval aviators. In September 1945, he was released and entered Yale University. Tom Brokaw was right, wasn't he? They said this was the greatest generation, wasn't he? These guys were sharp. So I asked the question, what's the legacy of these individuals? What's the legacy of John F. Kennedy? What was the legacy of Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, Herbert Walker Bush, Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford? What did serving in the Navy do for them, do to them? What did serving in World War II do for them or to them? I always ask these questions. I think historians are just wired to ask these kind of questions. So the legacy, not the whole legacy, but I suspect that the legacy of their experiences means that having lived through World War II, meaning the beginning of World War II, they remember this individual right here. They remember Neville Chamberlain coming back to England in 1938, waving his paper around, very, very big gathering at the airport when he landed, waving that paper around, telling the world, we have achieved peace in our time. The peace in our time that he was talking about was the fact that he had just sold out the people of Czechoslovakia. Hitler was, listen, this is going to sound very familiar with what's happening right now. So let me describe this. Hitler was saying, there are German-speaking peoples in the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. And because they're being harassed, it's my duty to go protect them. Does it sound familiar? And because no one wanted to have World War I occur again, Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, and Edouard Daladier, the French Prime Minister, went to Munich and sat down with this liar, future murderer, and bigot, and believed his song and dance about, all I wanted just is one piece of territory, and I promise you, I'll have no more demands. They wanted to believe so desperately, they did. But look, let's be fair. In 1938, there are still veterans from World War I walking around, minus a leg, minus an arm, and in some cases, minus a face. It wasn't like people could forget World War I. They were desperate to not do that again. There he is standing with Adolf Hitler. So he comes back to Munich, comes back and says, we have achieved peace in our time. Those 5 future presidents, they're alive during that moment. They'll recall that. Those 5 future presidents, they'll not only remember that, they'll remember the false peace, the false hope that was given to people around the world. And just as I heard somebody say just about a week ago, we already learned that when you don't stand up to dictators, that you end up losing more life afterward when you fight to fight them anyway. They believed him. They believed him. They wanted to believe him so desperately. And then they remembered this guy right here. They remembered the breakdown of the Grand Alliance. It was called the Grand Alliance between Russia, the world's greatest communist power, with America, the world's largest capitalist power, with Great Britain, the world's largest colonial power. You know, strange, they say politics made strange bedfellows, so it did. But they remembered after, they also remembered, those 5 future presidents remembered how Stalin had double-crossed America, how the Russians through spying they remembered how Stalin, when the revelation came out about how Stalin had killed so many of his own people, especially in Ukraine, in 1930, something called the Holodomor, an engineered man-made famine, trying to collectivize Ukrainian farmers who decided they wanted to own their own harvest, which of course makes sense. They remembered that part. They remembered the death threats and the murderous nature of Joseph Stalin. They remembered the beginning of the Cold War, how the relationship broke down so quickly. They remember Winston Churchill coming to Fulton, Missouri in 1946 and telling the world, I have some bad news to give you. An iron curtain has been drawn across Europe from Stettin to Trieste. This iron curtain, where the Red Army everywhere went, into Romania, Budapest, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Warsaw, Poland, Prussia, and all of East Germany. They remembered all of that. They remember the Iron Curtain speech. They remembered when the Russians really showed who they were, because up until 1948, lots of people in the United States still referring to Joseph Stalin as Uncle Joe, like he was some kind of like, you know, benevolent teddy bear or something. Well, when people from East Berlin were trying to escape into West Berlin, and he basically put borders up and tell people that they could not escape into West Berlin, and then prevented the British and the French and the Americans from getting to West Berlin by ground by just cutting off the border. It initiated something, or required something called the Berlin Airlift that lasted for a whole year. They remembered that. Those 5 presidents remembered that. Those 5 future presidents will remember the North Korean invasion that occurs on June 25th, 1950. They'll remember that. Those 5 future presidents will remember the development of and the people's fears about something called the domino theory. Because in the 1950s, the domino theory didn't seem to be a theory. It seemed like it was actually happening. China was lost to the communists in 1949. Russia was lost to the communists in 1917. And it appeared that with Korea at war, and then Vietnam, with the French being kicked out of Vietnam at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, those 5 future presidents that have all served in the military, that have all seen dictators come to power, they remember what dictators do. This is the new dictator in town. And their wartime experiences have taught them that you can fight me now, or you can fight me later, but you're going to fight me. So those 5 future presidents, as they went into the future, the question was, what are they going to do? And we have a question like that for ourselves in our time. Now what do we do? We have promised ourselves never again. If you've ever been overseas and been to Dachau or Auschwitz or any of the concentration camps, you know that after World War II, I've been to Dachau twice. The very entrance of Dachau is the first concentration camp built by the Germans just outside of Munich. The sign out front says, never again, we must never again let this happen. They're a crime against humanity. Well, I agree, never again, except for the fact that we seem to be at it again, or it's never again happening right now. We'll have to figure this out. From the greatest generation, 5 American presidents who served in the Pacific Theater, who served their country well, and who I believe their experiences shaped them as individuals. They shaped them and eventually helped to shape their presidency and the new era of the Cold War after World War II. I've had a great time talking about this. Thank you all for coming out. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's have some questions.
Tom has the microphone with him. So if you have any questions, let Tom give you the microphone so that our guests at home can hear better.
Shoot, I'll go. Hi, Fred. My dad was in Pacific in World War II at that time. And in between being ensign and lieutenant, he was a lieutenant junior grade. So I heard that growing up. Something I heard later in my dad's life, and I wish he was still alive so I could still find out more about this, but our armed forces were all classified and categorized by race. And we don't see any black people that became president out of World War II. You know more about those reasons than I do, but I know on my dad's ship, everyone was white, except everybody that was in the galley and cooking and serving the food, and that affected my dad as he went through his career and where he had an opportunity to perhaps right some of those things.
Right.
And also, when my dad came back, there was the GI Bill, and he'd already graduated from college, so he was able to go back to school and get a master's degree and prosper more and more from that, just as all these gentlemen here were. So I guess my question is, could you expound on that and, you know, the effect that all had as our country? I know 2 of those guys, Kennedy And Bush, I mean, they came from powerful families before they went off to this war and had all those advantages.
Yes, yes. Well, okay, the military, during World War II, we do fight with a segregated military. It's not until President Harry S. Truman signs Executive Order 9981, which desegregates the military. He does it in 1948-49. So when we go to the Korean conflict, we're going there with, for the first time in American history, not fully desegregated, but a desegregated military. Speaking specifically of the Navy, when the order came down to segregate, the Navy had traditionally been one of the more recalcitrant, resistant to changing the ranks. And within the Navy, the Marine Corps was the worst. Black people were not allowed to join the Marine Corps until 1942. And then when they did, where Camp Lejeune is in North Carolina, they set up a completely separate training area called Montford Point on the other side of Camp Lejeune. Today, there's something called the Montford Point Association, where Black Marines from that era, there's a complete group that keeps alive the memory of the Montford Point Marines. And there was a gentleman named Sergeant Major Edgar Huff. He became the first Black Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. And Ed Huff was about 6'5", you know, about as wide as these 3 chairs. You couldn't help but see him when he walked in a room. And he was, you know, and so you think about that, your wonderful question. Think about that time and what these guys had to do just to fight to get into the uniform to serve the country that was telling them no, 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 rejecting them every step of the way. The thing that always encourages me about something like that is, at a time when they had every reason to say, you know what, forget this place. There's something about the American ideals and the American philosophy of liberty and freedom that made them want to get in there and earn it anyway. So they persisted with that. The other thing about the Navy was this. You're right, your father was right. Usually on board a naval vessel, if you were a black on board a naval vessel, you were assigned either a cook or a steward, either cook food, serve food, or clean up after the food was eaten. Dory Miller was such an individual. Dory Miller, on the morning of December 7, 1941, shot down several Japanese aircraft and earned for himself the Distinguished Service Cross. The Navy Cross. The Navy Cross, again, is the highest award you can get in the naval service. It's just one step below the Congressional Medal of Honor. Dory Miller was a cook from Texas. So a landlubber who's a cook on board a naval vessel that shot down, but like every other person on board a ship, he had to be trained in gunnery exercises, and that's what got him ready for that attack on December 7, 1941. But generally speaking, black people were confined to galley and mess duty. And there's something very pernicious about this, because I ran across a report one time, this is with the U.S. Army, a 1925 report where the Army was essentially saying, black soldiers, I mean, just to be blunt about it, they're stupid, they're lazy, don't have the intelligence or whatnot, so you can't train them for anything other than the most menial, basic labor. Well, that had been disproven in World War I. That report was produced in 1925. That had been disproven in World War I with the Harlem Hellfighters. And during the Civil War, with the 54th Massachusetts, 186,000 black men served in 25% of the Union Army were black soldiers at the end of the Civil War. 5,000 black men served in the Continental Army, even after George Washington said he didn't want them. He changed his mind after the British said, we'll take you. So there's a lot going on there, and I think one of the most bizarre things that happens in World War II, and there are plenty of bizarre things, but this is bizarre. We have African American fighter pilots, Tuskegee Airmen, who meet up with all-white bomber crews, B-17s, to escort them to targets inside of Nazi Germany to drop bombs on not one of the most, but the most bigoted regime in all of human history. I'm talking about more than apartheid South Africa or Jim Crow America. And to be more bigoted than those two places, you have to work hard at it. You have to want to be a bigot to be more bigoted than South Africa. So you have these black fighter pilots meeting up with all-white bomber crews. They drop their bombs, they protect them, they do combat together, and then they go back to England and land at separate air bases. Give me a break. I had the fortune, maybe just about a year ago, I was doing a presentation for the Society of Active Retirees just outside of Detroit, and and we got through the morning session, and the coordinator took me to lunch, And so we're sitting there at this place in lunch, and who walks in but Colonel Alexander Jefferson, one of the last remaining Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh my God.
He was just a few weeks away from his 100th birthday. So he comes, he says, "Come over here." He says, don't sass me, I'll punch you. I said, "You're still a cocky little fighter pilot, aren't you?" So, but Colonel Jefferson told me, I had met him about maybe 3 or 4 years earlier. He told me this really, really sad story that you all know. You all are very well informed. So, you know that Willow Run was a place where they built a lot of B-24 Liberator bombers. And so Colonel Jefferson at the time was living in a senior tower with a gentleman who was Jewish. And so this gentleman, we went to dinner that night, and the guy says, I can't remember his name, but he said, "You know, I went through the entire training program to be a B-24 pilot. I mean, he went through the ground school, flight school, he flew solo. And you know, solo's the last thing you do before you get your wings. He flew solo successfully, expected to get his wings, and he didn't get them. So he went to his commanding officer and he asked him one question. He says, "Is it because I'm a Jew you're not giving me my wings?" And to that guy's credit, he said, "Yeah, that's it." He said, "I'm not going to lie to you. That's exactly why you're not going to get your wings." Now, it's World War II. The Japanese attack on December 7th, Hitler declares war on December 11th. We need all hands on deck. Every race, every color, male, female, whatever you are, we need everybody cooperating. And yet in the United States, we're having these bifurcations. And the one thing that Colonel Jefferson said to me which really stuck out, I asked him, I said, because he got down, he was shot down and then stayed in a German POW at Luftstalag for about maybe a year before he came back to America. I asked the obvious question. Okay, the Germans, they don't like Jews, they don't like people of color. You're a black man inside of a Luftstalag, how do they treat you? He said, "I was treated better by the German guards than I was treated in Detroit." And I said, "Wow, that's indicting on several levels." Yes.
I found that there's 3 units that I've been able to uncover, U.S. military World War II, that were black. There's several other Navy ships that had crews on them that were mostly black, officered by whites. There was the Tuskegee Airmen, everybody knows about them. There was the 761st Tank Battalion, and they were officered by whites. Patton didn't want them. His statement at the time was something to the effect that blacks weren't educated enough.
Yeah.
Which, on the surface, educated or too stupid or whatever, but they were, if you deny somebody an education, then they're not going to be smart enough maybe. But
well,
there
you know what
are some that rose above it and were educated enough.
I was telling my students, it's one thing for someone, it's one thing to not mistake education for intelligence. Okay, education is finishing school. I think sometimes, you know, what could we have had a cure for cancer by now? How much could we have saved the earth? Because we have found alternative energy sources right now. If we stopped cutting people out and use all that human capital for the betterment of humanity, instead of picking. Look, we don't like it when government picks winners and losers in business, right? So why do we do that as human beings?
There was also a U.S. Army 155 millimeter artillery howitzer battery. Battalion. And I met that gentleman. He was on my route. And he told me a story about how he met in a culvert during a German air raid. He went in one end, Andy Rooney went in the other, they met in the middle.
The 761st Tank Battalion, Kareem
Abdul-Jabbar,
His father.
the basketball player, he wrote a book on that.
Very good.
He wrote a very good book on that. So if you're interested, I don't know.
And I'll also recommend a book that was written by one of our speakers. It's coming up, James Campbell. It's called Port Chicago.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's about
the explosion.
The explosion
That's
and
right.
the stevedores and the men in the military there. And it's an incredible book too. And it's about a very little known chapter
That's right.
of military history and a lot of things that shouldn't have happened.
You know, one of the questions I had when just doing some random research one day, I said, you know, I know that the Tuskegee Airmen, they flew single engine aircraft, the P-51 and the P-47s, but I wondered, did they fly any multi-engine aircraft? And it turns out that some of them were trained on the B-25, make sure the twin engine aircraft, but they were not trained on the B-17 or the B-24 because the Army did not want them to be qualified to fly 4-engine aircraft, so that after the war, they would be applying for jobs as commercial airline pilots. So they purposely didn't train them and check them out. And I thought, I mean, it's just one of those things where you say, it just makes you stand back on your heels and go, you're kidding. But of course they're not kidding. So there was work to do. President Truman desegregated the military, and the funny thing about the military is that you don't expect the military to be the cutting edge of social change, but it was. But that's because there was a chain of command. Did people like it? No, they didn't like it. Did they resist it? Of course they resisted it. But this commander-in-chief, they got in line, and then Korea happened. But I'll tell you what, take a look at pictures from Vietnam. You look at pictures of Vietnam, you see black soldiers and white Marines and black Marines. You know, as they say that there's no atheists and foxholes during wartime. Guess what also doesn't exist a whole lot in wartime? Racism. When people are shooting at you. Because everybody watching your six. I'll watch yours if you watch mine. Okay? Great question though. Other questions?
Brad, I'd like just to make a comment.
Yes.
Is this working or not? I don't.
Yes,
think-
I hear you, great.
Yeah, okay. During World War II, in the officers' mess, were exclusively Filipinos. They didn't have Americans working there, serving officers, because Philippines was part of the United States until 1940. Well, it's a colony. I shouldn't say part of it. It was a colony.
Yeah, yeah.
And the only reason I can say this is I actually managed from 1968 to 1969 the Filipino stewards. Was a supply corps officer.
Okay.
And so that was still going on in 68, 69.
That late.
And that was segregated from blacks. Well, I take that back. The chief I had was a black fellow, great guy. But the staff had to be non-American Filipinos.
Why was that?
It was part of some old covenant agreement, and I need to look further because I'm a retired Navy Supply Corps captain. But this went on from when we took over the Philippines in what?
1898.
1898. Okay,
So
until 1946 when the Philippines were free. But we continued this way into the 1970s.
Yes.
So so from the Spanish American War is 1898, the Philippine insurrection is 1899 to 1901, 1902.
Right.
So from then up until the Vietnam War then.
No, 46 the Philippines became independent.
Okay.
But well through the Vietnam War, the only people that served officers aboard ship were Filipino stewards. Americans, black, white, Hispanic, Native Americans did not serve in the wardroom. I was their division officer in 68 and 69 on the USS Columbus.
Besides the obvious, I wish I could understand the psychology behind that. I really wish I could. Okay. Well, I stand corrected on that point. I guess that means I only get about, what, 25,000 views?
Sorry.
Somebody somewhere in the military cut a deal with the Filipinos because I was in the Coast Guard. We had Filipino stewards all the way to 76, and I remember.
Okay, so that late.
Did they move into supply department then too?
Yes.
Okay, so the same thing. We had in our supply department. We had Filipinos.
Look,
there also.
I grew up on Clark Air Force Base in the 1960s, and my father was in the Air Force. And I know that there are a lot of Filipinos working aboard the base.
Right. Can I make another comment?
Please.
He just made an important point. If they got U.S. citizenship, other ratings were suddenly open. Now the comfortable thing, because of their leadership, their senior enlisted and officers, was the supply corps. They tended to move to dispersing, move to foods, ship store, because the cooks for the enlisted were all American citizens. It's only for the officers that were Filipinos. But once they got their citizenship, and of course the big deal was they would go 2 years without going home, then get 60 days leave, and when they retired after 20 years, they were the wealthiest person in town by far. And that was a lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah. I wish I could understand the thing, but so Americans cook for American sailors, but Filipinos cook for the officers.
Correct.
We had Filipino cooks though too.
All right, do we have any
And
other?
listen, you all, nobody ever said racism had to make sense, right? Okay.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Just a lighter comment, and correct me if you remember differently, but one of our future presidents, you said, ended up in Ottumwa, Iowa.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in the TV series MASH, Radar O'Reilly, the company clerk, was from Ottumwa, Iowa. I thought you might like to know that.
I did not know that.
I mean,
Yes,
the
sir.
character, not the actor.
Right, right.
Hi. Just an interesting note about, you mentioned George Herbert Walker Bush. What a lot of people don't know is his pilot training for landing and taking off from aircraft carriers was done on an aircraft carrier in Lake Michigan.
I've heard about the fact that they had Lake Michigan simulators.
Yeah, they built aircraft carriers in Lake Michigan just for the purpose of training naval aviators.
I'm going to give our newest exhibit on the second floor a little plug. For any of you that are interested, we have a temporary exhibit on loan to us right now from the Michigan Maritime Museum, and it is all about World War II and the Great Lakes, and it talks all about the things that were going on in the Great Lakes during World War II. Aircraft carriers is part of it, and submarines being built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin is part of it. Remember though, they built Vallejo class, we are Beta class, our submarine came from Mare Isle in California, just so that we all know that our submarine was not from Manitowoc.
And listen, you all, you know what? This is why I so enjoy you all coming up here. Peg, thanks for the invitations, because I'm in constant learning mode, and really when I talk to you all, there's always these tidbits that I learn from you. I learn from you, I appreciate it. It is so much better than getting this. Will it be on the test?
I look forward to seeing all of you and all of your buddies next week. If they can't come in person, please bring them here by Zoom. The more the people that we explain about military history so they can honor a veteran, the better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.